is Alicia Singh, and I'm a junior in the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm also the career chair for the Geopolitics Student Advisory Board and have been involved with our Fellows program as a member of 2 student strategy teams, Spring 2022 Fellow Elliot Williams and Spring 2023 Fellow Chris Direwalt. Growing up in Alabama and as a student at Georgetown, I've watched how increasing party polarization has shaped our current political climate. Senator Romney's commitment to his principles and dedication to our country's institution in an era of hyperpartisanship has been an inspiration to me in pursuing a career in public service. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Mitt Romney. Senator Romney was elected to the United States Senate from Utah in 2019. Prior to his career in the Senate, he served as the 70th governor of Massachusetts from 2003 to 2007, and was the Republican Party's nominee for President of the United States in the 2012 election. Senator Romney has earned a reputation for reaching across the aisle to advance major priorities that benefit Utah and people across the country. As a part of the G10 working group of bipartisan senators, he played a key role in enacting landmark legislation that makes a once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's physical infrastructure. In the midst of the global COVID-19 pandemic, he also helped lead negotiations on the Bipartisan Emergency COVID Relief Act, legislation that provided more than $900 billion in American relief to students, families, businesses, workers, and healthcare providers. Senator Romney continues to advocate for his Bipartisan Trust Act, legislation to rescue our federal trust funds, programs like Medicare and Social Security, from impending insolvency. Following his remarks, the senator will take your questions in a discussion moderated by Mo Alathe, Executive Director of Geopolitics. You can join the conversation on social media by tagging @Geopolitics and the official event, #Romney@GU. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage Mo Alathe and Senator Mitt Romney.
Thank you.
Good evening. In Hoya Saxa. Look at this crowd, Senator. Amazing. Thank you all for coming tonight for this, what I hope is a very timely conversation. Senator, the last time you and I spoke, we did a virtual event during the pandemic. It was maybe within a month or two after the students had all been sent home, to talk about America's leadership in the world. And what's maybe most surprising to me is that conversation didn't solve all our problems. I thought we would have figured it all out there.
I have all the answers, though. They just don't.
Well, then we'll get to them tonight.
Right.
I do have a very pressing question, but before we do that, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the greater Romney, Mrs. Romney, who is here tonight. Mrs. Romney, welcome.
Would you stand up, and this is my fan.
I was talking with Liz, your chief of staff, earlier today, and we were just talking about some of the themes I wanted to discuss. And with everything that's going on in the world, internationally, here at home, a lot of the dysfunction that we're seeing in government today leads me to, I think, what might be the most pressing question of the night, which is, are you rethinking the whole booze thing as a result of all this?
I know you're wanted to start off talking about a number of different things, but I just think we need to recognize right now the tragedy that's occurring in the Middle East, the many Israelis that were killed purposefully in many cases, a horrific manner, and the people that were kidnapped. It tears at your heart. At the same time, there was a large number of Palestinians killed accidentally today. I don't know whether you saw that or not. Uncertainty as to what the source was of that tragedy, but a hospital was hit and hundreds apparently have been killed. The Israeli government points out that it is actually not Hamas. People thought maybe a Hamas rocket. It's actually a group called Islamic Jihad, that about a third of their rockets in the past have landed within the Gaza Strip. And the Israeli government says that's the source of it. Of course, the Hamas is saying, no, it's the Israelis. So we don't have full information at this stage, but I think we have to acknowledge the extraordinary tragedy associated with the invasion of Israel and the resultant loss of life and suffering that's going on in the Middle East.
Couldn't agree with you more, and thank you for that. And I want to get to that a little bit more in a little bit. But I thought, sort of thematically, as we think about this entire conversation, And we're going to have a conversation first, the two of us, and then about halfway through, I'm going to invite you all in because I think your questions will likely be more important than mine. But the theme I really wanted to focus on as you were reflecting on your time in public service is sort of diagnosing the health of democracy, not just here at the United States, but across the world. Because I do think that over the past decade or so, we have seen quite a few data points that point to at least some major stress tests for democracies in general. And so I kind of want to reflect on that a little bit and start at home and then look abroad. And so let's start with at home, and let's start with the chamber that you're serving in now. You recently announced that you will not be running for re-election in 2024. And so I'm kind of curious if you could maybe take a few moments to reflect on your term in the Senate and what it has shown you about how democracy is being practiced here in Washington right now.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that we're more divided as a nation than we've been in a long, long time. Obviously, we were most divided during the Civil War, but we're highly divided now. And I think the reason for that is that our media has moved from a setting where there were editors and fact checkers, and where if you're a crackpot with a crazy theory of some kind, you're probably not going to get it published in any kind of a way that's going to get picked up by the public at large. Because 20 years ago, people read newspapers and magazines and looked at the evening news. Those things were all carefully vetted in most respects by editors, fact checkers, and so forth. That's gone. You guys are getting your news, certainly as I do now, by going on my device. That's curated for me, and I'm seeing stories, many cases I agree with, some I don't agree with. But oftentimes what I'm seeing in social media, there are no fact checkers, there are no editors, and if I have a really crazy crackpot theory, just absolutely, completely wild out there, I can put it out there and get millions of hits. I can get a lot of people seeing it. Well, that was not possible. And the people who are influencers, if you will, and have the biggest following are people who are angry and are pointing out the foibles in the other side. And interestingly, we're drawn to those things as human beings. And so politicians have begun to reflect that, hey, if you want to get support, you want to get money for your campaign, your next campaign, the more outrageous thing you say, the more likely it is that you're going to have people following you. And so you have people increasingly coming to Washington whose objective in staying in office is to make noise, not to make law, not to change things in a way that might be better for the country, but just to make a lot of noise and to show they're angry and fighting. I mean, right now, Jim Jordan, for instance, you've heard is running for Speaker of the House. My former chief of staff sent me a message today and said, it's interesting. Here's a guy who wants to be the Speaker of the House. Do you know how many bills he's passed that he's authored? None. And how many bills that he's just been a sponsor on? By the way, you get to sign up to be a sponsor of a bill. All right. And so, I'm on lots and lots of bills that I didn't write, but I'm a sponsor. None of the bills he sponsored has ever become law. So we're looking at electing a person who would be second in line to the presidency who's never passed a bill. But he's certainly well known because he's able to make a lot of noise. And that's the currency of the realm these days in politics, is finding a way to stand out and to be well known. And if I were to ask you the names of Congress people that you know, they'd almost all be people who don't actually do anything or pass any law, but they are very outspoken. And how does a democracy work? One, when the population is getting information that may or may not be accurate, and two, when the people that are most well known are those that aren't accomplishing things, but instead are performing. And so politics itself has become more of a performance art. I mean, President Trump, for instance, what is he good at? His background was performing. He was on TV, he was a WWF owner and would go out there with the wrestlers and so forth. That's what he did, and that's what has given him the prominence that he's received. So, yeah, it's a very different environment than might have existed in the earlier days of our democracy, and it's kind of hard to understand where we're going to head, where we're going to go in that kind of setting. By the way, the Senate in part because we get elected over an entire state instead of a small district, we tend to be a little more bipartisan and a little more oriented towards getting things done, I believe, than the House. And certainly the president typically is going to be more concerned about larger issues. But the democratic process is very much in flux as a result of that changing dynamic.
As I think you know from our last conversation, I spent most of my career working in electoral politics on the other side of the aisle. And I remember writing ad scripts and prepping Democratic candidates for the Senate especially. And so many of them, we would talk about about our ability, my candidate's ability to work across the aisle, to bring people together, to find bipartisan solutions. I look at ads today and I don't see as much of that rhetoric. I don't see as much language talking about bipartisanship and bringing people together. Is it disincentivized now, that whole concept?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and by the way, it's not just on the right. It's more on the right, I think, than the left generally. But Bernie Sanders doesn't get up and say, hey, let's work together and see if we can't find a way to save Social Security. No. I mean, he has his point of view. He fights for his point of view and has huge support among Democratic voters. Do you know how many bills he's passed? None. All right? And he's not willing to sit down and work across the aisle and see if there's common ground and compromise. No, he's not going to compromise. I mean, I remember being at a town meeting and someone said to me, are you going to compromise? And he said, I can't vote for someone who's willing to compromise. I said, sir, are you married? I mean, and the whole nature of America, I mean, from the very beginning, it was a compromise. I mean, as you know, we didn't live up to our founding documents from the very beginning. Out of compromise. I mean, that's kind of how this system works, and we've become a more perfect union as time has gone on. But I mean, I saw the poll that was done here at the university, and 78% of respondents said they wanted someone who would work across the aisle. But I think 82% of respondents said, but my party's already gone far enough. The other party's the one that needs to move. I mean, this is impossible, but that is the attitude, that we should dig into our respective positions and not compromise, not reach across the aisle. And that's one of the reasons I decided, okay, one term was enough in my case. We had a group that was able to work together, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and we negotiated and passed a lot of bills. You wouldn't be familiar with them, but one was the Infrastructure Act, another was the Marriage and Religious Freedom Act, another was the CHIPS Act, another was the Electoral Count Reform Act. I mean, there are a whole series of things we were able to get done. That group is sort of dissipated. Rob Portman, for instance, has left the Senate. I just don't think much is going to get done, in part because of this highly polarized political environment.
So I want to pull on this thread a little bit, and thank you for mentioning the poll that we did, because we have been tracking over the past several years voter attitudes towards polarization, how bad they think it is, who do they blame. But it's this third question of, do they really care or want it? And I'm asking this because, look, you spent most of your career in the private sector, which is very market-driven. And I've always believed politics is also a very market-driven industry. It's driven by the marketplace of voters. In our poll, we ask, agree or disagree, common ground and compromise are noble goals we would like to see our leaders aspire to. 87% say yes, we want to see more common ground and compromise. Literally the next question, agree or disagree. I'm tired of leaders who compromise on my values. I want them to stand up and fight the other side. 84% say they agree with that. It's as if voters are saying, totally, I want you to find common ground. Come to where I'm standing and then we'll be on common ground. If that's what if the marketplace is sending that kind of a mixed signal, what do you and your colleagues do, right? I mean, are you supposed to be representing the will of the voters or following them or leading them? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think in the private sector, by and large, as you indicate, it's the market, and you're trying to create products or services that will be acceptable to the market. And you try and gauge what people will be interested in. You try and influence that to a degree, but even now, advertising only reaches a small subset of our population. So you're always trying to create the right product that'll get attracted by the market. in the world of politics and liberal democracies generally, in the past, they've not been driven so much by the market telling the leaders what to do, but instead people actually leading. I mean, you think about the great leaders in America. I happen to believe that what has distinguished our country is not so much the policies we've adopted as it is the character of the American people. And the character of the American people has, to a certain degree, been shaped by our leaders. Parents, leaders of religions, political leaders, presidents of the United States. And I mean, following the Civil War, I presume there was a lot of anger. I presume people were ready to go out and punish the other side in every way they could, particularly the winning side relative to the losing side. And yet we had a leader in his second inaugural address who said, "With malice towards none and charity for all." And that set the tone. The market might have done something entirely different than what a leader was able to do. And he, as he said, he drew upon our better angels. That's what he did. People, I mean, we each have sort of the little devil on one shoulder and the little angel on the other, as the old cartoons used to show. And you need to have leaders that draw on the best of us and encourage us to be lifted above our more base instincts. And today, we're finding in the media and in politics and in all sorts of places that people are finding that they can make more money by appealing on the more base instincts. And that is, unfortunately, much of the attitude of our country now towards politics, towards the country, towards our institutions. Almost the respect we have for institutions has gone down in almost every area. I mean, literally, actually in every area, it's gone down. In some, it's gone down to such a low level. I mean, the only people who respect Congress are our relatives, you know, and wives and husbands. It's like there no one else does. But that is, I think, the character of what's being done, and I think it's obviously a real threat to the future of democracy. I mean, I hope I'm sure you do recognize, looking at history. You're here at a university. I've got a chart on my wall in my office that shows the history of the Earth going back to 2000 BC, and who were the great leaders, the great empires that existed at each point in time. And if you go through the whole history of the Earth, going back 4,000 years, what you find is the default setting of world history is authoritarianism, not democracy. We are an experiment of very short duration. And what you're seeing right now suggests that we're going to have a course correction, or we'll fall into the kind of default setting that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea hope they can reassert.
You've mentioned the Civil War a couple of times, and I want to get to a discussion about what that course correction could look like. But referring back to the same poll that we've been talking about, we asked voters, on a scale of 0 to 100, how bad do they think the division in our country is right now? 0 being no division, 100 being edge of civil war. And consistently over the past couple of years, the mean response has been in the mid to high 70s. That a majority of Americans believe we are about 3/4 of the way to civil war. Now, whether or not we actually are, to me, is less relevant than people actually believing that we are that divided. How do we begin to turn the corner on that level of polarization where we believe we are tearing ourselves apart?
Yeah, I don't think you can point to one person and say, if we could just get rid of this guy, why everything would be better. Because there will be others that say, hey, that works, and we'll follow in his or her steps to profit from polarization. I don't have the answer to that. I look at other civilizations in history that have begun to divide or have fallen into, Jimmy Carter called it a malaise, and there's sort of two circumstances that have led to a turnaround. One is where there's been a crisis so severe that it woke people up, and they said, okay, we can't do things the way we've been doing them. But not a crisis so severe that it kills the civilization of the country. The other is an extraordinary leader, if you will, a Lincoln, a Churchill, that is able to galvanize the people of the country and lead them in a way that shapes their particular civilization. There were three great emperors in Rome that did that. Obviously, Churchill did that. I think you may not agree with his politics, but Ronald Reagan brought an optimism to our country at a time we were pretty down, and helped defeat the former Soviet Union. So I mean that I think is what we're looking for. And I have to be honest, I don't see that emerging right now in our presidential leadership. By the way, I like President Biden. He's a lovely person, and I respect him. But having the energy and passion to break through the polarization in our country and bring us all together is something which has eclipsed him so far.
I want to talk about a couple of current events and then sort of come back to this general theme. You referenced earlier the speaker's race. And what's interesting to me, and I think you've made very clear your thoughts on on Congressman Jordan, who as of now, I think, failed to reach the number of votes on the House floor.
On the first vote.
On the first round, they've delayed the second.
You never know what's going to happen, so we'll see.
Right. But it's now been 2 weeks without a speaker. And the last time we did this, last year, it took 15 rounds to get a speaker. I guess my question is, is that a reflection of dysfunction? Is that, there are some who point to this and say, democracy is always supposed to be messy. I don't recall it ever, there's a fine line between messy and dysfunctional. And so I'm just wondering, have we crossed into that zone of dysfunction? Can we pull it back? And what kind of message is this sending to the rest of the country and to the world about the United States and its leadership?
Yeah, it's not helping in terms of our posturing around the world. China is out saying that we're a declining civilization, that we're ungovernable and so forth, and so this adds to that perception. Hopefully we'll get that cleared up at some point. But I think you're seeing in the House the result of there being a very narrow margin of victory of one party over another. And when that happens, 2 or 3 or 4 people can gum up the whole works. And the same thing, you could look at the Senate. The same possibility exists in the Senate, where 1 or 2 people are able to be the tail that wags the dog. And so I think you're seeing the natural result of it being so narrowly divided. And then a few people who are, if you will, reaching a lot of currency and getting a lot of campaign contributions by putting their finger in the machinery. I mean, the folks that are the most outrageous are getting huge donations, and the people that are quiet and voting responsibly for one person or another, they're not getting anything out of it. I mean, so there is. I mean, this is new. We didn't have this kind of setting where people are, on Twitter or X and on Threads and Instagram and getting huge contributions by virtue of the performance they're making. So, I think it will resolve. I can tell you, I'm a little surprised that our Democrat friends have not come together with the majority of the Republicans in the House and said, hey, why don't you put someone forward who represents the majority of Republicans, and we'll either vote present so you guys can vote as a majority for the person you want, or we'll vote for that person. And right now, the Democrats are saying, yeah, we'll do that, but here's the pound of flesh we want. And it's like it's a bridge too far. No one is willing to sign up for that. So, yeah, a little leadership from one side, either side could resolve this. The Democrat leadership could resolve this by saying, hey, look, we'll support someone who, for instance, will put a bill on the floor to get aid to Ukraine and Israel. And but they want more than that. And so far, the deal hasn't been crossed.
You're a guy who has spent a lot of time in your political life within the major party infrastructures, having been a Republican governor in a Democratic state, Massachusetts, having been your party's nominee for president, serving in the United States Senate. Do you recognize the two parties?
Well, I don't recognize mine.
I was trying to be bipartisan in the question, Senator.
I've never recognized yours. But mine has changed. I mean, I don't have a political home these days, and there are a lot of folks who feel the same way. I don't agree with the, if you will, the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party, and the fact that they were so successful. I mean, had it not been for South Carolina and the courage of one brave Democrat congressman, Joe Biden would not have been the nominee of the Democratic Party, and Bernie Sanders might have been the nominee and could have been president. And let me tell you, the economic vision that Bernie Sanders has would not allow America to be the hope of the earth or to have a military that could defend us. Our debt would go absolutely through the roof. Our economy would slow down. There's just a lot of things I think that he and his cohort of the Democratic Party would do that would very badly damage the country and your future. At the same time, on our side of the aisle, look, our party is overwhelmingly dominated by Donald Trump. And while there are a number of policies where he and I agree, on the matter of his character, and people say, oh, it's his style. It's not his style, it's character. On a matter of character and the values that he exudes and communicates to the people of America, he is badly off base and is doing great damage. So, we have, I think approximately 70% of Republicans still say that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. It's like, are we going to abandon truth to that degree? I mean, it's absolutely absurd. I mean, after all this time, all the courts that were, solicited to look into it, there's been no evidence of widespread fraud. Actually, most of the evidence I've seen so far has been Republicans trying to corrupt the election. And yet they continue to put it out there and promote it. It's like, how does a party survive in a setting like that? And by the way, if you're running for office as a Republican, particularly a Republican congressperson in a district which is overwhelmingly Republican, you don't worry about the general election. You only worry about the primary. And you've got to say the election was stolen or you're not going to win. So it's, do I recognize the parties? No, I don't. Now, what's going to happen? Well, if Donald Trump is our nominee, and he almost certainly will become our nominee, if he loses, he's a two-time loser, and I think a lot of people are going to say, okay, we got to take a different path. Maybe not, but I think that will help reorient the party. If he wins, heaven help us in terms of that'll be a whole different direction for the country. So a lot depends on what happens. I mean, to a great degree, one has the idea that the parties are led by, I don't know, the head of the DNC or the RNC. That's not true. They're led by whoever the nominee is or the president is. And people flock to that person. They leave their party, they flock to that person. And my party has flocked to Donald Trump, and he is an entertaining person, but I don't believe he ought to be the president of the United States.
I don't want to dwell on the book, but there's a new biography coming out in a few weeks about you that's got some of the excerpts show lots of interesting little nuggets. I'll let everyone go out and buy the book and read it for themselves, but there's one nugget I actually wanted to pick up on, and that was this idea that you approached Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia, to talk about possibly starting a third party heading into the next election with a core message of, avoid the stupid.
Stop the stupid. Yeah, stop the stupid. I had someone in mind.
I'd love for you to expand on that a little bit, but what it actually brings me to, what I'm really trying to get at here is there room in our politics for a third way, for a third party, for multi-parties? Or are we too entrenched? And are there other reforms, the systemic reforms, that we can be looking at to help address some of the problems you've been outlining?
Yeah, a third party running a nominee for president is not going to accomplish anything other than throw the election as a spoiler to one of the other two major party candidates. So there's really no role for a third party running a candidate for president. Might a third party endorse one of the two people for president. And that's what I was thinking of, that a third party might raise money and then listen to both candidates of the two parties and endorse one of them and then use the money to help elect that person. And by virtue of that third party being a centrist party that would endorse, it might pull the candidates more to the center. That was the idea. And whether that has merit or not, I don't have a judgment at this point. I don't think you're going to see a third-party process yield a new leader for our country, in part because of the Constitution, the way it works, which is if a third-party candidate were somehow miraculously to get a substantial plurality of the American voters, but not enough to get 270 electoral votes, which is the challenge, then the race goes to the House of Representatives. And the House consists of Republicans and Democrats. They're going to choose either the Republican or the Democrat, not the third-party candidate. So a third-party candidate is a spoiler in almost any circumstances that I can imagine.
In a couple of moments, we're going to start taking your questions. You're going to see standing mics put up in the aisles. Feel free to begin lining up at those mics. But before we start taking the student questions...
Where are the mics?
They're coming.
Oh,
They're
okay.
coming. That was their cue.
Yeah,
Senator.
okay.
I want to look at this globally because, as we said at the outset, I don't think the challenges we are facing here in the United States are unique to us. That I think democracies, whether you're looking at the fight over Brexit in the UK, some of the recent elections in across Europe, and certainly what we are seeing now with the tragic events unfolding in Israel, in Gaza, as well as Ukraine. So I'm wondering, you just got back from Israel. Maybe you could take a few minutes to sort of give us your thoughts on how what's happening there plays into this global struggle, as well as what's happening in Ukraine, to help give us that kind of context.
Well, without question, there is a movement of populism. And populism, I mean, you know what it stands for. Populism is saying things that sound popular. They're not necessarily based upon logic or fact, but they sound good, they're popular, and they get a lot of support. H.L. Mencken said at one point, to every complex problem, there's an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And that's kind of what populism is. And right now it seems to be having great currency throughout the world, which is there are populist politicians that are suggesting answers that are simple and clear and simply wrong. And they're drawing upon anger and resentment. Anger at the other people, whatever group that is, and ascribing any failures or disappointments to the influence of that other group. And that's working. It's calling on our lesser angels, if you will, borrowing from Lincoln again. And that's the reality of what's happening around the world. At the same time, what's unfortunate about that, well, many things are unfortunate, but one thing unfortunate about that is that that's a movement obviously within democracies. It's not a movement inside China, all right? Not a movement inside Russia or Iran. I mean, and so they don't have to worry about those kinds of attitudes because they manage the media. People who stand up and make statements that they don't like are eliminated or silenced. So they don't have the same problem. So at the time when we're in a battle to preserve liberal democracy throughout the world, we're embarrassing ourselves and hurting ourselves on the world stage. And this is just the reality of what we're going through. I mean, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they're succeeding. They're winning. They're getting more nations to line up behind them as time goes on. And that's obviously a great danger for you and for our future.
All right. I have many more questions, but let's get to the good questions now. And I would be remiss after your comments if we didn't start with the woman wearing the Bernie shirt.
Hi.
So if you could tell us your name, where you're from, your school and year, and then ask your question in the form of a question, that would be great. So.
Yes. Hi. My name is Finley. I'm a freshman in the College of Arts and Sciences. And that was it, right?
You're good. Yeah.
Awesome. So as someone who does believe in the importance of bipartisanship, perhaps contrarily to my shirt, in your opinion, I understand your feelings of losing a political home and not recognizing the two parties. The Republican Party seems to be in disarray. What does the future of the Republican Party look like to you? And what do you hope it becomes? And is there hope for them to reorient the party and return to traditional Republican values?
Yeah, as I've said to a certain degree, our party will be shaped by whoever we nominate. And if we nominate Donald Trump, which I expect, that's what our party is going to be for at least 4 years. If he loses, there may well be a search for something new or a different kind of leader, or there may be someone who comes along with the same orientation. But I'd note this, which is young people are not signing up as MAGA, all right? And ultimately, my party has no electoral prospects if all we can get is old white guys, all right? And because we're dying. And young guys are taking over. And by guys, I mean guys, women, and men. And so at some point, someone is going to wake up that you want to win elections, not just fight to lose. But both parties, Jonah Goldberg, who's a columnist, interesting columnist, he wrote a piece saying both parties are working very hard to appeal to a smaller and smaller number and become a minority party. And we actually need to move towards the middle, but we're not there. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, let's go over here.
Hello, Senator. My name is Sophia Toback, and I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm a junior in the college studying economics. Thank you so much for being here today. You're talking to a lot of young people that are here because they respect your backbone to stand up to the extremism on both sides of the aisle. In this world where making a lot of noise gets you attention, gets you votes, gets you money, what advice do you have for us? And what advice do you have for us as we develop our backbone and develop who we are as people?
Yeah, I'd be really angry if I were you guys, and angry enough to be involved in politics, either to run or to support someone that's running, and just show your involvement in the political process and get other people to vote and so forth. And why do I say that? Because my generation is really messing things up for you. And I mean, just as an aside, I mean, we have voted ourselves larger and larger benefits as older Americans, huge retiree benefits, which we don't pay for, because at the same time, we voted for people who will lower our taxes. So we lower our taxes and then give ourselves more money. And now we're out of balance by about $1.7 trillion a year. And the interest on our national debt this year will just about equal the amount we spend on national defense. And by the way, we'll never pay back the debt. My generation's never going to touch that. You're going to have to pay that interest about $800 billion a year. I mean, the taxes you pay the rest of your life will be paying for the debts we racked up for us. And you guys have sat back and allowed it to happen. And it's extra. And by the way, both President Biden, and by the way, so why are we so out of balance? Well, because Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are spending massively more than they take in revenue. Both candidates for president, leaders, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, have said they won't touch those programs, either to raise revenue by raising taxes to pay for them, or by changing the program, the retirement age, and so forth. So we're going to keep on adding $1 to $2 trillion a year in debt, which you are going to have the interest on all your lives. It's like, you guys ought to be going nuts. And so I get involved in the political process by either at some point, running yourself or helping in a campaign, getting your colleagues to run, asking if they voted. If you guys vote, then you'll have more clout than the old baby boomers. Thank you.
But you did say when you announced you were not running for re-election, that one of the reasons was because you believe that there should be a generational change and it's time to pass the torch on. We're sitting here in front of a room full of people who are eager to take that torch. But I look at some of the most strident voices in the Congress today, and they are some of the younger members. They are some of the people who sort of came up in this social media age, in this age that is defined by who can speak the loudest. How did they not fall into that trap?
Because they're smarter. They go to Georgetown.
Hoya Saxa.
Shoot.
Hi, Senator Romney.
Hi.
Romney. My name is Andrew. I'm from Lake Forest, Illinois. I study philosophy and finance. I wanted to first thank you for your years of service. Can you talk about a time where the best interests of the American people conflicted with your own moral beliefs? And how do you think future leaders should approach this dilemma?
Let's see. There are times, I'm just trying to think. I mean, maybe the greatest conflict that I've experienced as a senator has been a belief that voting to convict Donald Trump on the impeachment trial was very bad for my personal self-interest, that it would create a risk for me personally, for my family, that it would be a disaster politically. At the same time, I felt it was ultimately at the end of the trial, it was the right thing to do. And I tried to guard against something which is human nature. Our capacity to rationalize what is in our own best interest is enormous. I mean, your capacity, like mine, to rationalize eating the chocolate bar when we know, we've had enough already is enormous. We all know that. But that happens in Congress as well. It's like, if I vote this way, that might hurt my reelection prospects. And so we can rationalize the vote and convince ourselves we're doing the right thing. And that's the experience. And you just have to guard against it. You have to recognize your natural tendency and say, look, I'm going to try and figure out what is really the right thing to do here, as opposed to just what's in my own personal self-interest. Thank you.
First, thank you for coming. I'm Ben. I'm a senior in the college. I'm from Park City, Utah, and this is a kind of a Utah question. So, for people,
everybody, as goes Utah, so goes the nation. Yeah, right.
So, for people who don't know, really quickly, last election, midterm, Democratic Party in Utah did not nominate anyone. They endorsed Evan McMullen, and he, in the polls, was very close to Senator Mike Lee, and you did not endorse him, and very close to the day of the election, he went on TV and said, quote, all 48 of my other Republican colleagues are on board with me, and then said, it's not too late, Mitt. So when you had this discussion of this other party, you said not to put forth anyone, but more to possibly endorse. Do you see this non-endorsement as sort of a step towards, in the future, endorsing possible independent candidates, or is this sort of a silence in the future as well?
I must admit that I think individual politician endorsements are worth a bucket of spit. I mean, and does anybody vote based on what their governor, who the governor endorsed, or who their senator endorsed? So I don't think that makes much of a difference. I think a political party that endorsed someone and then raised several $100 million to run ads for that person, and then turned out people to knock on doors and get people to vote for that person, that would potentially make a difference. But that idea, something I'm thinking about. I don't know that it's ever going to reach fruition. Look, you have more impact joining a campaign and helping a candidate than by endorsing. Most people don't care about who endorses who. Yeah, thanks. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for being here, Senator Romney, and thank you so much for your support and care for our democracy. So I wanted to say, Alaska implemented ranked choice voting in 2020, a system meant to calm political discourse, promote cooperation, and aid third parties. The following election cycle, Lisa Murkowski, who I assume is a friend of yours, a more centrist Republican, won the Senate seat, and Mary Peltola, a more centrist Democrat who vowed for bipartisanship, won the House seat. Do you think that this system is a better model for our democracy, and do you support ranked choice voting? And if not, do you have a proposal for something better?
Yeah, I think it's pretty encouraging. We haven't had a lot of examples yet to see how it works. Maine has a setting like that as well, and I think Colorado is kicking one off. It sounds good at this stage. It looks good on paper. I like the results that came out of Alaska and Maine. And so if it continues to perform well, yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. We've got to find a way to nominate people from the two parties that are more representative of the country at large. And what happens is people don't vote in primaries. So we select nominees with about 10% of the voters in a party voting for them. And by the way, the extremes, the rabbits, the wingnuts in respective parties, they try and figure out ways to get even fewer people to participate. They try and stop primaries altogether and nominate through conventions where only a few hundred people are going to decide. Or to have caucuses where just a small number will decide. Or the more extreme will go out and spend a whole evening, a whole night in a meeting to decide who the nominee is. So, yeah, I mean, this is a process does make a difference here. And ranked choice voting, I think has, at this stage, the evidence suggests it would be a superior way to proceed, and it's going to be up to states to adopt it. Yeah, thanks.
Two other political reforms that come up frequently in conversations, and I'd be curious your thoughts on them. One is the Electoral College, and the other is specific to the Senate, filibuster reform. What are your thoughts on each of those? Well,
the Electoral College, we're not going to change the Constitution. I actually think the Electoral College is fine and happy to let it continue, but we're not going to get rid of it, in my opinion. I mean, changing the Constitution is very, very hard to do, as you know, and you're not going to get Republicans that are advantaged through the Electoral College to vote to eliminate it. All right, so that's just that's not going to happen. What was the other one?
Filibuster.
Oh, the filibuster. If we lose the filibuster, we lose a major critical element of our democracy. I don't know how we would go on. Because, by the way, the filibuster is basically this. Should the Senate require 60 votes to pass a bill? That's what it is. No one gets up and gives long speeches and so forth like you imagine with the term filibuster. It just means, should things pass by a supermajority? And what that means is, for something to become law in the United States, both parties have to agree. If that isn't the case, and all you need is a one-vote majority, when Republicans get the House, like we have now, and the Senate, we had, a couple of years ago, we had both the House and the Senate and the White House. When that happens, well, let me tell you, our base is going to insist that we do some pretty extreme things. We're going to say no more unions in the public sector. We're going to drop taxes for all sorts of people we care about. I mean, I'm just telling you, the anti-immigrant policies will shock people. I mean, because that's what our base wants, and we get the votes. It's all majority rule. And by the way, that means that the Democrats will take over, 2 to 4 years later, because people will be angry at how extreme Republicans were, and then they'll do all the stuff they want to do. And by the way, what that means is we'll go from guardrail to guardrail in policy. Tax policy will shift. Whoa, we're going to swing. Corporations are going to be taxed at 0 under Republicans and at 50% under the Democrats. And I'm exaggerating slightly, but what I would note is that in order for people to invest in their kids, to invest in the future, for businesses to invest in building new facilities and so forth, they have to have some confidence about what the future holds. And if we are bouncing from place to place, the uncertainty would kill the investment that we make in our future. Our economy would be devastated. So the 60-vote rule turns out through time to be absolutely essential to the functioning of our democracy. So by the way, when Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the White House, I think it was 30 of 50 Democrats in the Senate wrote a letter, do not change that 60-vote rule. We will not. But then when they got in charge, all those Democrats, every single one said, change the rule. We want to get rid of the filibuster. It's like, guys, you got to protect the institution that has allowed us to keep from going from guardrail to guardrail.
Thanks. All right.
Good evening, Senator. Thank you for being here. My name is Ashwath Tiranalai. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a freshman in the School of Health studying healthcare management and policy. Earlier today, you talked about some of the bills you've passed in your time in the Senate, but I was wondering, of all your accomplishments, which one are you most proud of?
As governor, it was the plan that got our healthcare system working and got every person in my state insured, almost every person in my state of Massachusetts insured. As a senator, I'm not finished yet, so I'm going to keep on working on those things. But the infrastructure bill was the most fun because we were able to stop a lot of bad spending, and we got Republicans and Democrats to find common ground, got it passed in the Senate, in the House, and got the president to sign it. And it is going to allow us to be more competitive. And by the way, when I say more competitive, what does that mean? It means it allows our jobs, it means our companies are able to compete with China. And that means that we're able to have an economy that can afford a military. It means an economy that can pay the interest on the debt. It means an economy that can create good jobs for people. And the only way you can get real wages to go up is if there's more demand for your work than there are workers available to fill that demand. And so you want that. We want us to be more competitive. So, yeah, that investing in infrastructure was, in my opinion, an important piece of legislative accomplishment. Thank you.
Good evening, Senator. My name's Anjan. I'm a first year in the School of Foreign Service. So Nikki Haley is currently talking about raising the retirement age, but that same proposal in France caused riots for weeks. And in general, Americans love their entitlements. What do you hope to see in terms of actual politically realistic policies addressing the potential impending insolvency of our nation's most important social programs?
Yeah, the French love protesting. And Americans are basically a little more reasonable and responsible. I think people, they were, at least I hope they still are. What happens in Social Security, which is the Social Security through its accounting rules hits a wall at about 10 years. And under the law, Social Security benefits that seniors get every month will be cut by 24% automatically. It's about 10 years. Depends on when we hit this accounting thing, when the trust fund, they call it, runs out. I don't want that to happen. No one wants that to happen. So we're going to have to make a change of some kind. And the elements are these. One is raise the retirement age by 1 or 2 years and do it over a long period of time. 2 is to raise more revenue by taxing people more. Those are the 2 extreme examples, and most likely there'll be some compromise with a bit of both. And people will say, I hope, hey, we don't want to kill Social Security, we don't want to cut benefits to seniors, and we're going to have to make some changes to make sure the program survives. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Senator. My name is Matthew Buscarino. I'm a freshman in the college, and I'm from Millington, New Jersey. Since you are retiring, looking back on your time in politics, are you satisfied with the work that you have done? And if you could redo any of your anything, what would you have redone and what would you do differently?
Yeah, I'd win every election, and so, but I don't regret my choices. I'm glad I was in the private sector for most of my career. I love the private sector, love that work. I'm happy to have spent time in the public sector. I'm still a senator for another year. There are a number of things I'd like to do before I get out. I don't look back. My dad used to say, only look forward. I try and do that. I don't. Do I make mistakes? Absolutely. Did I say things that got me in trouble? Absolutely. Could I wish I could go back and erase those? Yeah. But those things tend to get washed out and don't have an impact on the results. Look, I would have liked to have beaten Barack Obama in 2012. All right. And by the way, had I done so, Donald Trump would not be president. So, there are effects of that. People say, well, why is that? Well, because I'd have been, hopefully, a 2-term president. And, he'd have been too old to run by the time I got finished. And so it's just, there are consequences of those things. But, President Obama was ahead of me in the polls by a couple of points throughout the entire election. Sometimes I made a mistake and would drop a point or two, and he'd go up a point or two. But after a week or so, it went back to the same level, and I wasn't able to convince people I should be president. But I'm not sure how I'd have done that if I'd had another try at it. Yeah, thank you. Hi.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank you again for your time. My name is Ariana Nasiri, and I'm a senior in the college studying government and business. I'd like to call back, if it's okay, to Mo's question about democracy. You know better than anyone else in this room that the cornerstone of our nation's democracy is our election system. And I currently serve on a bipartisan task force with former Ambassador Romer and Senator Zach Wamp that's focused on election security going into 2024. And with now threats both domestic and foreign, directly targeting the integrity of our nation's election systems, and with the current status of congressional appropriations for election safeguards being zero, what's your appraisal on what 2024 will look like in terms of election security? Will our biggest compromise be foreign adversaries, AI, or are we going to see more of a domestic threat towards the integrity of our elections?
Well, I know that if Donald Trump loses, he'll say he won. That I know. And there'll be a lot of people who believe him, and they'll be very angry. I give it kind of a 50-50 odds as to whether he wins or loses. I do think foreign interference is going to be extreme this time around, and I do believe that that AI will play a role that we have a hard time regulating. People say, "Hey, look, we need regulations on AI." It's like, what? I can barely use a cell phone. How am I going to be able to regulate AI? And it's out there. I mean, Meta took their system and put it on open source, so it's available throughout the world. How do we regulate all the bad actors that have access to AI? We don't. We can't. We'll try various things, but they will still be able to weasel around our regulations or our laws to the extent we can come up with something. But yeah, it's a real vulnerability. And one of the greatest disservices Donald Trump did to our nation was to cause people to not believe that the elections were fair and honest, because overwhelmingly they are. And around the world, if America can't hold fair and free elections, how do people around the world think their elections are? And if democracy, which relies on elections, is threatened in a way that would suggest that elections aren't fair, we got a real problem promoting democracy. So yeah, it's a huge challenge. Our system works for many reasons, but one is that we've given to the states the responsibility for running their elections as opposed to the federal government. If it were a federal system, my party, if we were in charge, might try and twist things for us, and the other party might try and twist things for them. That's going to probably happen at state levels, but there are 50 states. So to a certain degree that washes out, and you have some responsibility that will make up for any bad actors. I don't at this stage have fear that any state is going to try and corrupt the electoral process. I just don't see that. In our Electoral Count Act bill, we did provide for funding and for clarification of some of the elements that are designed to protect our elections. But I believe our election bill will be fair. But I do believe that the information people will receive will be corrupted, and we'll have a hard time knowing what's truth and what's not. Thank you.
We're getting close to the end. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more. So apologies to the rest of you in line.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I'm the lucky person. Thanks for being here, Senator. My name is Nico. I'm a senior from Dallas, Texas. So I've really liked what you've been saying about giving space to a younger generation. This brought me back a lot to think of Maxwell Frost and his comments saying that he had to drive for Uber while he was running his campaign, and he had a hard time getting an apartment in DC because his credit score was so bad. And so my question is, if we want to have younger candidates running for office, especially Gen Z candidates who might not have that treasure chest full of money to run a campaign, how do we get people involved? How do we get Gen Z running for Congress without the financial backing, without the name recognition? What's the path forward for younger candidates?
Well, first of all, when I say the next generation, I'm talking about people in their 50s and 60s. All right. So I'm in my mid 70s here, or late 70s. There's a term of art here. But younger people, one can run at the state level. By the way, my wife was the first elected member of my family. She became an official in our town and won an election before I ran for office, and did so as a very young person, young mom. How old were you? Do you remember when you got elected? She was in her 20s. You can establish a record. I also think it's helpful to actually know something before you run. And so having spent some life in the private sector or in teaching or whatever, I think that's helpful. But it is possible. As you know, some very young people have been elected to Congress, and they've, AOC, for instance. Look, she's very young and was able to break through. It is possible, although it seems that the people that are able to do so typically are saying something outrageous that generates a lot of clicks and a lot of visibility, and then they're able to raise money. My guess is AOC has raised as much money as any other congressperson, even though she was very young and had no experience and no political experience, that is, and no fundraising, no funds of her own to generate a campaign. So yeah, is it possible as a very young person? Yeah. You got to have a message that connects, and then go out and work like crazy. I didn't get my dad's advice to me. My dad was a 3-term governor of Michigan and ran for president. And he was born in Mexico, grew up, immigrated to the United States, lived in government housing, was poor, never graduated from college, but headed a car company ultimately and ran for governor and won 3 times. His advice to me was don't get involved in politics unless your kids are raised and you're independent financially. And he said, because you don't want to have to depend on winning an election to pay your mortgage, because that's going to cause you to perhaps shade your values and do what's politically expedient. And I didn't really intend to ever run for office, but those things happened at some point in my life and opened that window, and I stepped through. But there are a lot of different pathways. I just encourage you to be involved, even if it's just by talking to your roommates about, hey, get out and vote, will you? And make sure and register and vote in the primary. Make sure and vote in the primary. And maybe the most, one of the things you could do is to say, hey, I want to get behind this movement to have ranked choice voting in primary. I mean, yeah, just those things could also make a difference. Yeah, thank you. Look, I would tell you this. You can sometimes get weighed down. I'll wrap up with this, Mo. You get weighed down by all the challenges we face. And we face some big ones. The emergence of China as the most powerful nation on earth economically and militarily, unless we get them to change course, and we change course, the debt that we have, the climate change, the immigration mess that we have. I mean, our list of challenges is pretty severe. AI is a challenge greater than any other in my view. It gets a little daunting sometimes. But don't forget, freedom is an extraordinary elixir. Freedom allows people of independent thought to do extraordinary things that the world has never imagined would occur. And that's what allowed us and has allowed us to lead the world for such a long period of time. I'm still betting on the United States of America and on the cause of freedom. But I'm betting on people like you, if you will, entrepreneurs, democratic entrepreneurs, to use that freedom to help keep America the hope of the earth. Thanks, you guys. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Senator, I just want to close with a point of personal privilege. Look, I was a bare-knuckle partisan warrior for 20 years.
I know, I saw your resume.
Yeah. I worked hard in that 2012 race.
Yeah.
But I will say that the Senate is going to be missing something significant when you leave at the end of this term. We need more voices like yours. And I just want to thank you for coming here and inspiring those who are going to come up behind you, that next generation you're passing the torch on to. We didn't agree on a lot in terms of policy, but we do agree on the bedrocks of our democracy. And I want to thank you for all you have done to serve this country.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, guys.